let's get into the concept now of working with Windows permissions. Now, there's a couple angles you got to think about when you think about working with Windows and permissions, and that is the fact that there is what we call NTFS permissions, which affect rights either locally or remotely. Doesn't matter if you're sitting locally at the machine or you're connecting it remotely to the machine. NTFS permissions are going to affect you. And then there is the concept of share permissions, which is a type of permission that gets placed on a shared folder that gets made available across the network. And of course, that only affects people if they're connecting in remotely to the share, through the share, okay? Of course, what happens when you combine all of that together, when you have NTFS permissions and you have share permissions? So that's the kind of thing I want to look at with you right now. I want to help you understand that concept, okay? So let's get started. So the first thing you want to do when you're thinking about permissions is you want to, if you're trying to figure out a scenario with permissions, the thing you want to do is you want to draw a little table, okay? So you can draw out a really simple little table here that makes life a whole lot easier. All right, and we'll start out with just focusing on different users and groups, and we'll talk about NTFS permissions to begin with here, okay? So I'm just going to label this column objects, and I'm going to label this NTFS permissions, which of course, you know, on a Windows machine, you'll see that by going to the security tab of a file or folder, okay? And we'll talk about share permissions in a moment. Now, imagine we've got a folder that is called, we'll call it sales data, okay? All right, and we've got a user named John Smith, and John Smith is actually a sales and marketing manager. All right, so let's say that he is actually part of, he's part of the sales department, he's part of the marketing department, but he's also a manager, okay? So what can be a little crazy is imagine if your company was set up with 3 different groups. You had a sales group, and you had a marketing group, and you had a managers group, and let's say that John Smith is a member of all 3, okay? So the way that permissions would work here is, let's say that on the sales group NTFS for this folder, maybe the salespeople have been given modify. Okay, so that means they can read data, they can write to it, they can make changes. They can't delete subfolders and files, they can't take ownership or any of that, but they do have, you know, some permissions. And then let's say that you gave, let's say marketing people had read and execute, because you know they're marketing people, they're not actually full salespeople. Maybe you don't want them changing the data, but they need to be able to see it. Okay, and then you have the managers group who has been given full control. Okay. Now, full control is normally reserved for administrators, but in this case, we'll say managers maybe need a little extra power over that folder, and they've been given full control. So the question, you know, that's raised here is, what would happen if John Smith was to connect to that folder? Okay, it doesn't matter if he's sitting locally or remotely. What's his permissions going to be? So the rule of thumb thing you want to remember here, when working with permissions, let's say you're just talking about NTFS permissions for a moment. The thing you want to remember is this: NTFS plus NTFS equals cumulative. All right, so it's not most restrictive or least restrictive, none of that. It's cumulative. All right, so cumulative essentially means just add all the permissions up, and that's your effective permissions. Okay, so if you think about it like this, we've got sales group has modify. Okay, plus read and execute plus full control equals, well, you get all of that. But technically, you could just say full control because full control has everything. So John Smith's effective permissions would be full control. All right, think about it like this. Let's just use kind of a dumb analogy. Let's say you're talking about fruit. Okay, let's say that we say that the sales department can eat apples, and we say that the marketing department can eat oranges, and then we say that managers can eat pineapple. Okay, so apples, oranges, and pineapple, and then basically John Smith's part of all of that. He's part of sales, marketing, and managers. Then he can eat all those fruit, all the fruit. Okay, he can have apples, oranges, and pineapple. Now, the one thing to also remember here is this is talking about allowed permissions. What about denied permissions? So the rule of thumb with denied permissions is deny always wins. So if you deny a group, they're going to be denied. If I was to, let's say, allow the salespeople access to eat apples and allow the marketing group the ability to eat oranges, okay, and then allow the managers group the ability to eat pineapple, but they're denied the ability to eat oranges. Well, then John Smith would be able to eat apple and pineapple. That's it. Wouldn't be able to eat oranges. Deny always wins if there is a conflict, okay? So that's the thing to remember, all right? So the other thing to think about here is, what about share permissions? Okay, so I'm going to move these permissions out of the way. Forget about NTFS permissions for a moment. Let's just pretend that they don't exist. Let's talk about share permissions. All right, so share permissions over here, the share permissions are located on the share tab of a folder. Okay, so you have a share tab of a folder, and that's where they're going to be actually stored. Okay, so share permissions, the names are a little different, but ultimately you end up with the same effect. Okay, so let's say that you give salespeople. Oh, and one other thing I do want to mention here is, by default on a shared folder, you'll have everyone has deny. I'm sorry, everyone has read. And of course, by default, everyone gets read. But we'll throw that into the mix here in just a moment. Okay, I want to mention that now, but I'll explain it a little bit better in a moment. So let's say that salespeople have been given change permissions. Change is basically the equivalent of modify on NTFS lingo. Marketing has been given read, which is sort of the equivalent of read and execute on NTFS, and then managers has been given full control. All right. So essentially what you end up with is the same thing, because guess what? Share plus share equals cumulative. A lot of people, when they explain this, they'll say least restrictive. You can say least restrictive as well in this case, because it's not going to make any difference. Okay, but anyway, if you add all that together, change plus read plus full control, you're going to get full control. All right. Now, here's where things get crazy. Let's just look at the defaults, okay? Let's look at the defaults here. And what I mentioned just a moment ago is the defaults on shared folders a lot of times is going to be, there's a group called everyone, and the everyone group gets read automatically. And so then let's throw the NTFS permissions back into the mix. All right, so here's the NTFS permissions. So the problem you run into here is whenever you combine the permissions together, in other words, NTFS plus share, okay, when they conflict, it's the most restrictive that will apply. The most restrictive that will apply is what you want to consider there. All right, so think about it. Let's kind of work our way through here. If we do this, if we say, okay, well, let's start with this. We're gonna work this rule out first. So modify plus read and execute plus full control, you're going to get full control, and then of course read. And now let's add this up. Most restrictive, full control plus read equals read. So basically, John Smith, if John Smith connects across the network into the shared folder here, he's going to get read. But remember the other thing that I mentioned, and that is it only takes effect if he's accessing it across the network. See, these rules right here, these two rules right here, they only take effect if accessed over the network. That's something to remember. So if John Smith was actually sitting locally at the machine and accessing the data locally, then you'd only have to worry about NTFS permissions. Okay. All right. Now the last thing I want to get across to you here is let's get rid of the everyone group, and let's do the following. On the sales share, sales data share, we're going to give change permissions to the sales group. Marketing gets read. And then managers this time is going to get change. So looking at this, a lot of times people would say, oh, well, I know what the answer is going to be. It's the most restrictive, which is going to be read. But you would be wrong if you said that. Here's what you got to do. work your way down this little chart. Start with NTFS first and add those together. So modify plus read and execute equals full control. Okay, that's true. You add all that together, you get full control because, well, full control has everything. Now work out the second rule. Share plus share. Okay, change plus read plus change is change. Aha. Now do the last one. NTFS plus share. So full control plus change equals change. That's the most restrictive one, and there is your answer. So that would be the effective permissions for John Smith if he's accessing it across the network. Now, if he was accessing it locally and he wasn't going through the share, he'd have full control. Okay. So hopefully now that gives you a good understanding of permissions. Always draw a little table out, label everything based on what you're trying to do here, and this is going to really help you, I think, with understanding the way permissions works. I've had over years, I've taught this for well over 20 years, and I'll tell you that there's lots of people who think they understand how permissions work, and then they're a little bit shocked. And if you don't believe me that this is the way it works, try this out on your own so you can see it with your own eyes. This is John Christopher. I hope you enjoyed that video, and I want you to know that I'm trying really hard to grow this channel, so I hope you'll give me a like and a subscribe. Also, if you'll check the description in this video, I've got a link for you that can show you how you can get access to all my different courses. I have lots of different Microsoft certification courses that'll help you pass your exam. All right, thanks a lot for watching the video, and I hope to see you again.